What is truth? It's one of those big philosophical questions we hear tossed around all the time, but stick with me for a second. This isn't a trap. I want you to really think about it. Is there such a thing as objective truth, or is everything filtered through our personal experiences? Take my perspective, for example, as a Black woman. My view of the police may be shaped by lived experiences, both personal and collective. My white friend's view is likely very different. Does that mean that one of us is wrong? It's a complex question because truth isn't always clear cut. It shifts depending on where you stand. In today's film, The Truman Show, I would say spoiler alert, but this film is probably older than most of Gen Z by this point. Truman Burbank discovers just before his 30th birthday that his entire life has been a lie. His friends and family, actors. His world, a massive soundstage. His life, a reality TV spectacle. At its core, The Truman Show is about truth, the search for it, and the tension between reality and illusion. Truman's journey revolves around uncovering the layers of manipulation, and once he realizes the truth, the question then becomes, does he accept it, or does he break free? Truman's existence is completely controlled for the benefit of the show's creators and its audience. This theme resonates today in influencer culture, where individuals profit from their personal lives and brands, often at the expense of their well-being. Additionally, the exploitation of personal data by corporations echoes the film's exploration of how individuals can be turned into commodities. In today's digital age, we continue to grapple with questions of what's real versus what's curated, especially on social media. The film's examination of how we shape and manipulate our personal stories, whether for mass audiences or personal gain, resonates in a world where authenticity is both sought after and engineered. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube encourage users to build personal brands and perform for followers, blurring the line between authenticity and performance. Truman's struggle to understand the artificial nature of his world mirrors the anxiety that many feel today while navigating the pressures of online personas and the curation of their lives. This film is a scathing critique of a culture obsessed with control, surveillance, and entertainment. By highlighting Truman's lack of autonomy, the audience's complicity in his suffering, and the co-actor's entrapment within this fabricated world, The Truman Show reveals the dark side of a media-driven society. When The Truman Show was released in 1998, it came at a time when culture was undergoing significant shifts. The late 90s marked the rise of reality television, with shows like The Real World and Big Brother pioneering this new form of entertainment that blurred lines between reality and performance. To think that there was ever a time when those shows didn't exist is crazy, but here we are. These shows capitalize on our growing fascination with voyeurism, inviting viewers to watch ordinary people live their lives on camera, often without realizing how manipulated their experiences were for dramatic effect. The Real World was released in 1992, and it was one of the first to mix unscripted drama with a more structured format. This brought a group of strangers together to live in a house and simply be themselves. Its appeal lied in its raw, unfiltered portrayal of real-life situations, conflicts, relationships, and personal struggles. It reshaped cultural conversations about race, sexuality, and class in ways that mainstream TV hadn't before. Then came Big Brother in 1999, which took the real people in a controlled environment concept even further, turning it into a high-stakes game. Contestants were filmed 24/7, isolated from the outside world, and eliminated by viewers. The constant surveillance created an unsettling atmosphere, tapping into anxieties about privacy in an era when surveillance technology was advancing rapidly. As cameras became more ubiquitous and less noticeable, the idea of being constantly watched without knowing it started to feel increasingly plausible. At the same time, the internet was becoming mainstream, providing new ways for people to connect and share information. Online communities emerged, and the idea of crafting an online persona started to take shape, mirroring the performative nature of reality television. The dot-com boom made technology seem like an all-encompassing force, reshaping industries and fueling a culture of instant gratification where entertainment and information were just a click away. The rise of reality television, alongside the growing prevalence of surveillance in daily life, mirrored the growing discomfort surrounding privacy. The Truman Show took these real-world shifts and pushed them to their extreme, showing how media and surveillance can manipulate and control lives for profit. Truman's entire existence is a reality show, and every aspect of his life is carefully managed and surveilled without his knowledge. The film critiques how such manipulation can strip individuals of their autonomy, turning their lives into mere entertainment. Beyond media manipulation, The Truman Show explores the psychological toll of constant observation. Truman's emotional distress becomes central to the plot as he begins to question the reality around him. In today's world of social media, this mirrors the mental health challenges many face as they contend with the pressure to maintain an online image, leading to issues like anxiety, depression, and identity crisis. The Truman Show presents a fascinating paradox when it comes to free will. Truman's life is meticulously curated, his every move controlled, yet he's under the impression that he's making his own choices. This creates a tension between what we traditionally think of as free will, the ability to choose our own destiny, and the fact that Truman's every decision is subtly influenced or outright controlled by unseen forces around him. The film plays with this tension in a way that makes us question how much free will we really have in our own lives. At first glance, it seems that Truman has free will. He gets to decide where to go, who to talk to, how to interact with the world around him, so it's giving him the illusion that he's autonomous. But as he begins to notice strange things in his world, like repetitive events, suspiciously perfect weather, and people who seem to always be following him, this illusion begins to crack. It becomes very clear that the choices he makes in some way are shaped by the world that's been built for him. His life is carefully constructed and leaves no room for deviation. And whenever he tries to break free, like when he attempts to leave the island or starts questioning his reality, the people around him, like his friends or family, sometimes even strangers, play their parts in guiding him back onto the script, making sure that Truman never escapes his role. In this sense, it's almost as if Truman's life is directed by an invisible hand that constantly steers him back to the predetermined plot. This brings us to quite the catch-22. Truman thinks he's in control of his choices and that he's living a life that reflects his true desires. But his autonomy is continually undermined by the producers of the show who have ultimate control. Every time Truman seeks to make a meaningful choice, whether it's questioning the world or pursuing freedom, he's met with resistance, whether through subtle nudges or overt manipulation, like sending his best friend Marlon over to convince him that he's just going a little crazy. The beauty of this paradox is that Truman's rebellion, his resistance to a controlled life, becomes a powerful act of agency in itself, even if he's not fully free in the traditional sense. So the real question starts to become kind of philosophical. Can we ever truly be said to have free will when the world around us is constantly shaping our decisions? Whether those forces are societal expectations, personal relationships, or in Truman's case, the literal hand of production pulling the string. Truman's journey suggests that the more we try to break free, the more we realize that we're confined by forces beyond our control. But it's not just about freedom, it's about our desire for authenticity. Truman seeks to reclaim his true self in a world that continually tries to mold him into a character. His pursuit of authenticity becomes a central theme, even as his world is engineered to keep him in line. In the end, his choice to leave the dome, spoiler alert, the world that he's known for the last 30 years, is the ultimate exercise of this free will. For Truman, stepping into the unknown is a declaration of self-determination. It's a bold decision to confront the truth, no matter how overwhelming, and to pursue a life that's authentically his, rather than one that's been scripted for him. The idea of leaving the comfort of the dome to face the harshness of the real world may seem daunting, but Truman chooses autonomy over security. It's a choice that reflects our human desire for control over our own narrative, for the right to shape our own destiny, even if the world outside is terrifying, unfamiliar, and chaotic, especially now, dear God. For Truman, it's about reclaiming the right to make decisions for himself, no matter how unprepared he might be for the real world. But there is a vulnerability and risk that's inherent in his choice. Truman is stepping into a world he has no experience with. He spent his entire life within the dome, sheltered from the realities of the world outside. He's 30 years old at this point, with no idea how to navigate relationships, work, or even basic survival skills. The world outside of the dome is a place that he has never known. Truman's decision to leave is an act of radical hope. He believes that the real world, no matter how overwhelming, is still better than a life that's been built on deception. This choice taps into our fundamental human experience, the balance between the comfort of the known and the uncertainty of the unknown. It's this classic battle between comfort and truth that we all wrestle with at some point in our lives. Truth often seems like the morally superior choice. It's associated with being authentic, freedom, and self-determination. But comfort can't be dismissed. Comfort can be a necessary refuge, especially when facing the harsh realities of the world. In Truman's case, the comfort of the dome is a lie, a fabricated sense of safety that ultimately becomes stifling for him. He realizes that comfort without authenticity for him isn't true comfort at all. So which is better, truth or comfort? I don't think it's really a clear-cut answer. It depends on the individual and their circumstances. Truth can be empowering and liberating, but it can also be a heavy burden. Comfort provides stability and safety, but it can come at the cost of your autonomy and your authenticity. In Truman's case, truth seems like the better choice. He spent his entire life under this illusion of comfort, but it was comfort that was built on lies. When he chooses truth, he chooses to step into a world of uncertainty but freedom. Comfort in his case is a prison, a lie that's kept him from truly being able to live. But the emotional cost of facing the truth can be too much for some people. Comfort, even with its flaws, provides a sense of security that might be hard to give up. Ultimately, the tension between truth and comfort reflects our human experience. It's a dilemma we all face, whether to choose the discomfort of truth or the security of comfort. Truman's decision to leave the dome isn't just about rejecting comfort, it's about reclaiming control over his own life, choosing authenticity, and taking ownership of his own story. I want to pivot for a second and talk about the audience's role in the film, but also the audience's role in how we kind of interact with people in real life as well. The role of the audience in the film and their role in shaping the culture is actually really interesting to me, especially when you think about things like voyeurism and their inherent fascination with an individual's life. Society's obsession with Truman's life, particularly his life under surveillance, raises a lot of questions about the nature of our own curiosity and the ethical boundaries of observation. Truman's life is the ultimate spectacle, with a global audience watching him from the moment of his birth. His existence is meticulously curated and broadcasted on a 24/7 loop for public consumption. The audience's obsession with his life isn't born from a typical connection with a celebrity or a public figure. It's a very weird, unique dynamic, because Truman's an individual and a character. The people watching him aren't just passive consumers, but active participants in his story. They've been watching Truman grow up, witnessing every moment of his life as if it were a scripted drama, but one that's presented as real life. This concept is a deep, almost primal desire for control over what we perceive as authentic life. The audience's connection to Truman is not merely as a viewer of entertainment, but as someone who feels they know him, perhaps more intimately than any real relationship that they could form in the real world. This is where the notion of voyeurism comes in. The fascination with watching something unfold behind closed doors in the most intimate spaces can be incredibly addictive. It's not just that Truman's life is entertaining, it's that it feels accessible. In The Truman Show, viewers get to witness his every emotional reaction, his moments of solitude, confusion, joy, and heartbreak. It's as though they're living his life with him, experiencing it as themselves are part of it. This voyeurism is seductive because it's positioned as real when in fact it's all entirely manipulated. The fact that the audience has been watching him since his birth creates a sense of ownership and familiarity. Over time, they've invested emotionally in his life. It's not unlike the way people feel about long-running TV shows or serialized media where they watch characters grow and evolve over the years. When you've watched someone through every stage of their life, you develop a sense of attachment even though you're not personally involved. This connection becomes a type of parasocial relationship where the audience feels a one-sided intimacy with Truman. They know his routines, his friends, his fears, and his desires. However, this relationship is built on a false premise. They aren't actually interacting with Truman. They're interacting with a constructed version of him, a performance. But the illusion is so powerful that the line between reality and fabrication blurs for the audience. They've been watching Truman grow up for so long that in their eyes, they're this integral part of his life, even though Truman doesn't know they exist. This sensation of long-term observation creates this distorted sense of intimacy and connection. There's also something deeper at play in the audience's obsession with Truman. This is where the philosophical and psychological aspects of voyeurism start to come into play. Our society's obsession with watching others stems from a few core motivations. Number one is curiosity and control. Human beings have an innate desire to understand and control the world around them. By watching Truman's life, the audience gains a sense of insight into a world that they don't have access to. They observe his every move, knowing he's confined within a controlled environment, which provides this eerie sense of satisfaction. There's a level of voyeuristic pleasure that comes from watching someone whose reality is so meticulously planned, allowing the audience to feel superior and knowing the truth about Truman's world, even if he doesn't. Another motivation is escape and fantasy. People often turn to entertainment as a way to escape their own lives. Truman's life offers something particularly enticing, a world that's not only unfamiliar, but also staged in a way that feels safe. His struggles are scripted, so viewers can feel both the tension of the emotional journey and the reassurance that it's all just a constructed illusion. In a society saturated with unscripted chaos, Truman's world offers a controlled, tidy version of reality, something that appeals to those who want an escape from their own unpredictable lives. Another core motivation is the illusion of authenticity. There's also the dangerous allure of something that appears authentic, which is why Truman's story feels particularly compelling. His life is framed as real. It's not fiction or a performance for the camera in the traditional sense. The audience is watching him as if they're peering into a private, unfiltered version of his life. In many ways, this mirrors the way that we consume reality television today. The line between performance and authenticity is often blurred. Truman's life feels real because he doesn't know he's being watched, but as viewers, we know the entire construct is a performance. This duality between what's real and what's fiction plays into a deeper societal desire for authenticity, even in the face of manipulation. Another core motivation is society's desensitization to privacy. It's important to consider how our collective concept of privacy has evolved in the age of social media and constant surveillance. In Truman's case, the audience watching him doesn't question the morality of their actions, because in their mind, he's not just an individual, but he's an object of entertainment. This reflects how in real life we increasingly consume the lives of others through social media, reality TV, or even just the constant stream of news about celebrities, politicians, and everyday people who share their lives online. Our society has become desensitized to the violation of privacy, often viewing it as a form of entertainment rather than an invasion of personal space. The deeper psychological issue here is that we feel entitled to access other people's lives simply because they're publicly visible or documented. And the last core motivation is the desire for power. There's this element of power at play. The audience's control over Truman's life, watching him, knowing his every move, even influencing the course of his actions through the manipulation of his environment, gives them a sense of dominance. This mirrors a broader societal fascination with power dynamics, whether in the form of celebrity culture or the way people consume other people's vulnerabilities. There's something intoxicating about watching someone, knowing that they're trapped in a system beyond their control, even though it's something that we would never condone in real life. I would hope. The concept of constant around-the-clock access to a person's life, as exemplified by The Truman Show, has become not only a reality, but a normality in today's media landscape. With the rise of social media platforms, celebrities and influencers willingly, or perhaps reluctantly, open up their lives to the public in unprecedented ways. These platforms give us intimate glimpses into their personal lives, from mundane moments to highly curated highlights. And in doing so, they give the audience the power to feel more connected, more involved, and often more entitled to know the details of their lives. In The Truman Show, as we've discussed, the audience is watching Truman without his knowledge, deriving pleasure from his vulnerability and his unknowingly scripted existence. Today, however, celebrities and influencers are aware that they are under constant surveillance. But this awareness doesn't necessarily alleviate the invasive nature of the surveillance. In fact, it probably enhances it. The lines between public and private have become increasingly blurred, with people feeling like they have the right to know everything about a person, because after all, the person has made themselves publicly accessible. Social media creates this environment where fans and followers are constantly plugged into the lives of celebrities and influencers. Platforms like Instagram or Snapchat show every moment, whether it's behind the scenes of a photo shoot, a personal rant, or a casual video of a celebrity eating lunch. The temptation to keep sharing is encouraged by the algorithm, which often prioritizes content that engages the audience in real time. This constant sharing creates an addictive cycle. Fans are more connected because they see your life unfold in real time, much like Truman's audience did, but in a more immediate, participatory way. Audiences have access to the celebrity 24/7 through live streams, constant story updates, even direct communication through comments or likes. The fact that celebrities respond to these interactions make the relationship feel more real and reciprocal, fostering a sense of intimacy. But this access is a double-edged sword. While it allows audiences to feel they're closer to the celebrity, it also places celebrities in a position where they must manage their personas constantly, always navigating between what they share with the world and what they choose to keep private. The sense of intimacy and connection, though seemingly more authentic, is still heavily curated, and this can create a distorted view of reality, just like Truman's life was curated to give a false sense of normalcy to his viewers. While access to celebrities 24/7 may feel like a positive development for fans, giving them this illusion of proximity, it also has much darker implications. The constant surveillance of public figures through social media encourages the idea that it's acceptable to intrude into their lives. For influencers, this kind of pressure is exhausting. Live streaming isn't just about broadcasting what's happening in the moment, it's about performing for an audience. Even when influencers are doing mundane things like cooking dinner, they feel the pressure to make it entertaining. What may have once been an unremarkable part of their day has become content. This constant performance creates a sense that influencers are never really off. Their personal lives are constantly in flux. This mirrors the voyeuristic nature of Truman's world, where his every moment was watched, analyzed, and manipulated for entertainment. Today is no longer just the Truman Show that gives audiences endless access to an individual's life. It's real life itself. However, the consent to this viewing is often muddied. While celebrities and influencers may opt into this level of access by sharing their lives on social media, there's an inherent pressure to perform and conform to a public expectation. The boundary between private and public lives is often hard to maintain, and the very act of choosing to share is itself influenced by the desire to stay relevant, engage with audiences, and continue monetizing their personal brand. The ethical consequences of this kind of voyeurism are significant. For one, it fosters a lack of empathy. When we watch celebrities as if they're characters in a story, we lose sight of their humanity. We start to view them as objects for our entertainment rather than real people with real feelings. This can lead to increased pressure on celebrities to maintain a public image, often at the expense of their own mental health and well-being. The psychological impact on the audience is also worth considering. Just like Truman's audience grew emotionally attached to him over time, the same can happen with fans of celebrities or influencers. Again, they develop parasocial relationships where they feel like they know the person intimately, even though the celebrity has no personal relationship with them. This can create unrealistic expectations and a sense of entitlement, resulting in invasive behavior like stalking or inappropriate interactions. At its core, this obsession with voyeurism, whether it's watching Truman's life unfold or following the day-to-day lives of celebrities, reflects a deeper collective desire, again, to escape our own realities. So now that we've talked a little bit about the voyeurism and the audience, I want to talk about Christoph, because obviously he has a God complex, but he's a very interesting villain. And I feel like his role as both the creator and manipulator is very central to the story, and of course touches on some really deep philosophical, religious, and even ethical themes. His actions raise a lot of questions about the boundaries of control, the morality of manipulation for a perceived greater good, and the nature of freedom. When we dive into his character, we not only see the tension between creation and control, but also the emergence of a God complex, a theme that resonates with religious undertones and broader questions about power and ethics. Christoph is not just the creator of Truman's world, he's its absolute architect. He's designed everything that Truman has ever known, from the people in his life to the weather patterns to the very space that Truman inhabits. In his mind, Christoph is not just producing a television show, he has created an entire reality, one that Truman has never questioned. The manipulation, however, lies in the fact that Truman is unaware of this fact. Christoph watches over Truman like a puppet master, pulling the strings and orchestrating events to make Truman's life appear natural and authentic, while controlling every detail behind the scenes. But Christoph is not simply a creator, he's also a manipulator. His decisions aren't just about creating compelling television, they're about controlling Truman's life for the sake of the audience's entertainment. He manipulates Truman's emotions, relationships, and choices in order to maintain the illusion of normalcy. His power over Truman is absolute, and he's willing to go to great lengths to preserve it, even if it means silencing Truman's questions or shaping his reality in ways that prevent Truman from ever leaving the constructed world. Christoph's belief that the end justifies the mean is crucial to understanding his character. He firmly believes that Truman's life, as orchestrated and controlled as it is a kind of gift. He's not just creating a television show for the world's entertainment. He truly thinks he's providing Truman with the best possible life. In Christoph's mind, Truman's happiness is guaranteed as he's in this world where nothing bad ever happens to him, and he's surrounded by people who quote-unquote love him. Christoph even goes as far as to say that Truman's world is the most well-adjusted society he's ever seen, implying that it's a better world than the messy, unpredictable one outside. But it's important to note and think about whether Christoph actually believes he's truly helping Truman, or is he just trying to justify his own actions? He believes that by preventing Truman from facing the harsh realities of life, like heartbreak, disappointment, and failure, that he's protecting Truman from suffering. In Christoph's mind, the dangers of the outside world are too great, and Truman is better off in the controlled, sanitized environment of Sea Haven. In fact, when Truman begins to question his reality and seek an escape, Christoph's actions become more extreme, suggesting he's more committed to the show than to Truman's well-being. Christoph sees Truman as a kind of vessel, an actor in a role that must continue to exist for the sake of the show. Truman's autonomy doesn't seem to matter to Christoph as much as maintaining the illusion of the world that he's created. In the end, Christoph justifies his manipulation by viewing Truman's freedom as secondary to the success of the show. This reflects a darker side of the ends justify the means ideology that he carries. The belief that the greater good, in this case the success of the show and the perceived happiness of Truman, outweighs the individual's right to autonomy or truth. Christoph's actions are interpreted to me as a clear manifestation of the God complex. It's an unchecked sense of power and authority over others, often accompanied by a belief that the creator knows what's best for their creation, regardless of the cost. His character embodies the idea of a creator who holds total dominion over their creation and believes they're creating in the best interest of that creation, even when it means stripping away their freedom. In media, we often see this God complex reflected in characters who manipulate or control others for the sake of an idealized vision. One example is Willy Wonka. Like Christoph, Wonka's a creator who controls every aspect of his factory, manipulating the lives of the children who enter. Though he doesn't have the same level of omnipotent power that Christoph does over Truman, Wonka believes in teaching lessons and shaping the future of his visitors. He views himself as a benevolent figure, guiding his visitors towards self-discovery through his creations, but his methods are still manipulative and self-serving. Another example is Dr. Jekyll. Jekyll's belief that he can separate his good and evil side mirrors Christoph's belief that Truman's life can be perfectly controlled and contained in a world where nothing can go wrong. Jekyll also seeks to protect others from the negative aspects of human nature, but in doing so, he loses control over his darker half. Similarly, Christoph's desire to protect Truman from suffering leads him to become a force of control and tyranny, reinforcing the godlike need to dominate and protect a life that was never truly free to begin with. There are also a lot of strong religious overtones in The Truman Show, particularly in the way that Christoph takes on this godlike role. The concept of a creator who watches over his creation without intervening directly draws heavily from religious ideas about divine observation and omniscience. In many religious traditions, God is seen as an all-knowing figure who allows humanity to make its own choices, even if those choices lead to suffering. This sense of divine detachment can be seen in Christoph's actions or lack thereof. Though he has the power to intervene and control Truman's life, he doesn't. He watches Truman struggle, but only occasionally provides guidance, as when he manipulates Truman's reality to keep him in line. In a way, Christoph represents a type of God who allows his creation to exist within a set of rigid boundaries, while never truly offering them the opportunity for freedom or independent thought. Christoph, much like some deities, sees the bigger picture. He knows that Truman's life has a value as a spectacle, but he doesn't step in to free Truman. This mirrors a theological perspective where the creator allows the world to unfold according to its natural course, even when the created being is suffering. Christoph's use of the phrase, "I am the creator of the world," while controlling Truman's every move, positions him as a godlike figure who sees his creation as a work of art rather than a sentient being with his own desires and agency. Truman, in this sense, is both a creation and a subject to the whims of his creator. This is where the ethical dilemma of the God complex comes in. Is it right for the creator to control the creation in such a manner, even with the excuse that it's for the greater good? The religious aspects of the film also extend to the idea of Truman's journey as a form of salvation. Just as religious figures or heroes often embark on a quest for self-realization or spiritual freedom, Truman's ultimate escape from the artificial world can be seen as a metaphor for awakening, a search for truth, and ultimately a path to freedom. Truman's eventual breaking free of the constructed world parallels the idea of spiritual liberation, an individual coming into their own truth despite the controlling forces that seek to bind them. On the surface, Christoph may seem to care about Truman. He's been with him since the beginning, shaping his life with almost fatherly tenderness. There's an emotional attachment to Truman, especially evident in moments like when Christoph watches Truman through the surveillance system, or when he talks about the responsibility he feels for Truman's well-being. In one sense, Christoph generally believes that his actions are in Truman's best interest. He keeps Truman safe from the outside world where things could go wrong. He shields Truman from suffering, loss, heartbreak, pain, and as such, Christoph sees him as a protector. This care manifests in the way Christoph actively shapes Truman's life. He gives Truman the illusion of choice, presenting him with preordained paths that are constructed to appear as if Truman is making his own decisions. He's the godlike figure, orchestrating every part of Truman's existence, from the mundane routines to the dramatic moments. In Christoph's eyes, he's providing Truman with the best life possible. The world outside of Sea Haven, with its unpredictability and dangers, seem foreign and frightening to him, so much so that he doesn't want Truman to experience it. But this care is self-serving. Christoph cares about Truman in the sense that Truman is his creation, his art project. Christoph has spent over 3 decades creating Truman's world, and the emotional investment he feels isn't so much about Truman as it is about the success of the world Christoph has built around him. Truman is, at the end of the day, a means to an end. The star of a TV show that millions watch and care about. Christoph's attachment to Truman is less about love and more about ownership, control, and the preservation of the world that he's created. In the moment where Truman takes the boat and decides he is going to leave the dome, we see that Christoph is willing to put Truman's life in immediate danger in order to protect this carefully controlled environment. Christoph's actions, attempting to unalive Truman through the storm, highlight the darkness of his character. He believes that Truman's life, even if it's at risk, is worth sacrificing for the greater good, which is the continuation of the show. In this moment, Christoph's God complex fully reveals itself. He believes Truman's life is not as important as the world he's created. Truman, in his eyes, in this moment is expendable. The show must go on no matter the cost to Truman's well-being. What makes this moment especially disturbing to me is that Christoph doesn't see the moral contradiction. He doesn't see his manipulation and near abandonment of Truman as a betrayal of his care. In fact, he sees it as a necessary evil to preserve the greater good. Truman is merely a part of the larger vision, a cog in the machine that drives the world that Christoph has created. Truman's emotional and physical safety are secondary to the success of the show. This is the most telling moment in Christoph's character arc. His paternalistic love for Truman exists only within the confines of what Christoph believes Truman should be, not what Truman wants or needs. Christoph justifies his actions with the same logic that many controlling figures, whether in media, politics, or religion, use to justify their decisions. Christoph doesn't question the morality of manipulating Truman's reality because he truly believes that Truman is better off in the world he's created, regardless of the lies it is built upon. His God complex leads him to believe that he knows what's best for Truman, and no sacrifice is too great to ensure that Truman stays in this safe world that Christoph has created. Christoph's behavior also points to a deeper examination of the God complex in storytelling. The God complex is a psychological condition in which an individual believes they're superior to others, often treating people as objects or pawns in their personal vision. For Christoph, Truman is not a person with desires, dreams, or agencies. He's just a character. Christoph views himself as the ultimate creator who shapes Truman's world and controls his destiny. This God complex is a recurring theme in stories of creators and manipulators. Whether it's the controlling figure in the family, the CEO who bends people's lives for profit, or the artist who treats their subjects as objects for their vision, Christoph reflects the darker side of creation. The idea that a creator's care for their creation is only meaningful as long as it serves the creator's vision. In Kristoff's case, the vision includes a world where Truman never questions the boundaries that have been set for him. Truman's life is both a product and a tool, something Kristoff owns and controls for his own satisfaction. The film critiques this very attitude by asking the audience to consider the ethics of creation. What happens when a creator, blinded by their God complex, forgets the humanity of their creation? Kristoff's care for Truman is ultimately superficial because it's rooted in the belief that Truman's life is only as valuable as long as it serves Kristoff. The moment Truman becomes an obstacle to this perfect world, when he begins to wake up to the truth and seek freedom, Kristoff reveals the ultimate contradiction to his worldview. The godlike creator is willing to destroy the creation he claims to love in order to preserve his vision of the world. So let's talk about the rest of the cast here. We're mainly going to talk about Merlin, Meryl, and Sylvia because I think there's a lot interesting here about them. And the angle that I want to come at this from, first and foremost, is that Truman is the victim, but he is not the only victim. Let me explain. The actors in The Truman Show, I feel like, exist in this really strange, morally gray area where they're complicit in his imprisonment, but they're also kind of victims of Kristoff's world themselves. The actors closest to Truman, his wife Meryl, his best friend Marlon, and even his mother, live within an artificial reality just as much as he does. Unlike Truman, they know the truth, but their entire lives revolve around maintaining this illusion. Marlon is a really good example of this. He's been playing Truman's best friend since he was 7 years old. In a way, Truman is his longest and most meaningful relationship, even if it's built on deception. Now, does Marlon actually care for Truman? I would say probably, but his care is also conditional. His role in Truman's life is scripted. His words are fed to him through an earpiece by Kristoff. His emotional connection is real yet manipulated because at the end of the day, his job is to ensure Truman never leaves. It's this tragic dynamic. Marlon's both Truman's closest confidant and his most loyal jailer. Meryl, Truman's wife, is an even more difficult position. She's expected to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage despite not actually loving Truman. Her life is one of constant performance, so much so that when Truman starts to unravel, her only reaction is panic. She can't improvise beyond the script. Her infamous "somebody do something" moment isn't just about her fear of Truman. It's about her fear of the audience seeing the cracks in the show. These performers are paid to pretend, but over time that performance becomes their life. They exist in service of Truman with their own personal identities, taking a backseat to the roles they play. The show has consumed their reality. None of them can simply walk away. This mirrors real-life actors who become typecast or influencers whose entire brand is built on a certain persona. The longer they play their role, the harder it is to separate themselves from it. In a way, they're trapped just like Truman. He's imprisoned physically, but they're imprisoned psychologically. At the end of the day, The Truman Show is about control. And while Truman is at the center of it, Kristoff has built an entire world of people who are also under his influence. Some of them, like Marlon, have been there since childhood and know no other life. Others, like Meryl, are stuck in their roles because the show is too big to fail. The key difference? They have a choice. Truman doesn't. That's why his escape matters, not just for him, but for everyone who's been forced to live within this constructed reality. In some ways, I kind of see Marlon as the spare, and I see Meryl's resentment as something that built up over time rather than something that was immediate. It makes sense that both of them, while playing these vital roles in Truman's life, eventually would start to feel a level of hostility towards him, in my opinion. Meryl, or rather the actress that plays Meryl, signed up for this as a college student, likely eager for the fame and financial security that came with being the Truman Show's leading lady. But when you really think about it, how could she have really known what that would mean? She essentially sold her entire life to this role, her relationships, her future, even her bodily autonomy. Every major milestone in her life has been dictated by a script, from when she and Truman got engaged to when they were expected to have children. So when you think about it that way, it's no wonder she's bitter. In her eyes, Truman has been given everything: comfort, stability, a perfect life, while she's had to force herself to smile through a marriage she never truly consented to. Unlike Kristoff, who sees himself as a benevolent creator, Meryl is stuck, and she can't even be honest about her frustrations because she's still playing a role. Her hostility towards Truman might stem from the fact that he is the one who gets to live in ignorance. She knows this isn't real. She knows she's trapped, but he doesn't. And instead of feeling sympathy, she projects that frustration onto him. Marlon's relationship with Truman, I would say, is more complicated. The pneumonia story is a great example. Truman wanted to play North Pole, so Marlon suffered the consequences. It's a small but telling detail that suggests Marlon has always been the one to endure hardships so Truman's perfect life can remain intact. If Truman needed a best friend, Marlon was assigned to that role. If Truman needed to be kept in line, Marlon was the one who had to emotionally manipulate him into staying. And when Truman begins to question the world, it's Marlon who has to be Kristoff's mouthpiece, reassuring him that there's nothing beyond the life he knows. Could Marlon be another adopted child raised to be the spare in Truman's world? It's kind of a creepy thought, but it would explain why he's so loyal despite everything. Maybe he was taken in not to be the star, but to serve as the emotional cushion, the one who could take the hits, get hurt, and bear the weight of Truman's happiness. But despite all of that, Marlon is not free. He's just as trapped in this artificial world as Truman is, except he knows it's fake. That kind of long-term cognitive dissonance, being forced to be someone's best friend while also deceiving them, has to breed resentment. He can never fully express it, but it has to be there. Both Meryl and Marlon are victims of the Truman Show, but unlike Truman, they are aware of their imprisonment. That knowledge breeds resentment. Meryl wants out, but she can't leave without destroying the illusion. Marlon knows nothing else, but he's constantly forced to betray the one person who trusts him most. So while they might appear to be loyal on the surface, there's an undercurrent of hostility. Truman is the star, the priority, the one whose happiness and well-being dictate their actions. But what happens when you spent your entire life serving someone else's story? You start to lose yourself, and you start to hate the person who gets to remain blissfully unaware of what it costs. Truman's fake parents are another fascinating example of Kristoff's power. They aren't just actors playing roles, they're stand-ins for fundamental human relationships, which makes their betrayals even more devastating. When Truman's father returns, it's a moment that could have unraveled everything. The way he appears, ragged and desperate, suggests that at some point he broke from Kristoff's control, perhaps out of guilt or a desire to finally tell Truman the truth. But just as quickly as he reappears, he's swept away and reprogrammed back into the show. This moment highlights Kristoff's absolute control over the people in Truman's life. Even someone who seemingly wanted to break free is ultimately pulled back in. Whether it was through coercion, financial pressure, or psychological manipulation, Kristoff made him recommit to the illusion. The fact that the father so quickly reintegrates himself into the show suggests that no one is truly free from Kristoff's grasp, no matter how much they may want to be. It also raises the question, was Truman's father ever meant to stay gone, or was his death always a way to further Truman's fear of leaving? Kristoff is meticulous, so it's hard to believe he would let a crucial character like that disappear completely without a backup plan. Perhaps the father was always meant to return at the right time, to provide an emotional moment that reinforces Truman's belief in the show, just as he's beginning to doubt it. Truman's mother, much like Meryl and Marlon, is completely devoted to the illusion, but her role is even more insidious because she weaponizes parental love to keep Truman compliant. When he begins to question things, she reminds him of his father's death and guilt trips him into staying. This isn't just acting, she's gaslighting him completely, making Truman doubt his own memories and instincts. The way she interacts with him also reinforces the idea that Truman is not in control of his own life. She dictates his past by rewriting events as needed, his present by guiding conversations to steer him back into line, and even his future, like having a say in the children Meryl was supposed to have with him. Both parents' actions reinforce how deeply Kristoff controls this world. Even those who might feel guilt or doubt are ultimately absorbed back into the system. No one is allowed to exist outside of their role. This mirrors the way media, industries, and celebrity culture function in real life. A person might try to break free from a narrative that's been imposed on them, but the system is designed to pull them back in. Whether it's through financial incentives, fear of losing everything, or sheer psychological manipulation, Kristoff ensures that no one truly escapes until Truman forces his way out. That scene is one of the most intense moments in the Truman Show because it exposes just how fragile the illusion is and how everyone, including Meryl, is ultimately alone in their role. During Meryl's breakdown, I consider this to kind of be a crisis of faith. She's clearly terrified but still refuses to break character. She keeps trying to redirect Truman, to calm him down, to keep the script going, even when it's obvious he's losing trust in everything. This is why the scene is so unsettling to me. She could end it all by telling the truth, but she just won't. And why? Because she can't. She's trapped in the system just like Truman is, and has been conditioned to believe that the show's reality must be upheld at all costs. Even as she pleads for help, the production refuses to intervene because the illusion is more important than her safety. It's at this moment that she realizes just how expendable she is. Kristoff will not step in to protect her. She may have dedicated her life to this show, but when things get dangerous, she's completely on her own. That's when she finally breaks and screams for them to do something, screaming at the hidden cameras before she's abruptly written off of the show. This scene reads to me as a critique of religion, a pessimistic one at that, about the silence of God. Specifically, the idea that we're taught to put our faith in a higher power only to be met with silence when we're in crisis. Meryl, like a devout follower, believes in the world she's been given. She upholds it, defends it, and follows its rules. But when she finally needs Kristoff to step in, to prove he's watching, to save her, he does nothing. This taps into a deeply existential fear. What if the one we put our faith in isn't actually looking out for us? Many people are raised to believe that if they follow the rules, if they just do what they're told, if they believe hard enough, then they'll be protected. But then tragedy strikes. When life falls apart, there's often no divine intervention, and that realization can be devastating. In a broader sense, the show itself functions as a kind of religion. Kristoff is the all-seeing, all-knowing creator, shaping Truman's world without his knowledge. The actors and crew are his devoted followers, willing to sacrifice their own autonomy to serve his vision. And Truman, he's the believer, raised in a world designed to keep him from questioning anything. But the moment he does question, the system starts to fall apart. Just like religious institutions often resist scrutiny, Kristoff tightens his grip the more Truman doubts. The entire system is built on faith. Faith that the world around him is real. Faith that his relationships are genuine. Faith that someone is watching over him. But when that faith is broken, there's nothing left holding him there. Meryl's fate is a warning. When you put your trust in a system that only values you as long as you serve its purpose, it will abandon you the moment that you're no longer useful. Truman learns this firsthand, but what's chilling is that Meryl, Marlin, his parents, they've all learned it too, and yet they stay. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of comfort, maybe because, like in religion, leaving means accepting a terrifying truth, that the world you believed in was never real at all. Sylvia's role in The Truman Show is definitely one of the more nuanced and tragic ones. If we look at her character, it's possible that she started out with good intentions, maybe even wanting to tell Truman the truth, but ultimately the system and Kristoff's control forced her to comply with the narrative. There's a lot of room for speculation about what led her to join the resistance later. At first, she may have been someone who was recruited or hired because of her acting skills, someone who believed in the purpose of the show or didn't fully grasp its implications. She could have joined the cast with the assumption that Truman's life was just a well-scripted drama, and over time she may have realized the depth of his entrapment. Her growing awareness of Truman's suffering could have pushed her toward rebellion. Perhaps the guilt and realization that she was complicit in keeping him trapped in a lie slowly led her to join the resistance. On the other hand, her treatment on the set might have made her feel powerless, and it could be that she became disillusioned with the entire setup. The pressure of the constant surveillance and the invasive nature of the show could have soured her. There's a certain level of trauma in being so deeply involved in a system that treats another human being like a puppet, and it's possible that she too became a product of this system, molded by the show to believe that her actions were justified. The fact that she later joins the resistance suggests a breaking point, a moment where she recognizes that Truman's suffering outweighs the greater good of the show. Her arc could be a reflection of the emotional toll that being complicit in this form of voyeurism and manipulation takes on the participants. What makes Sylvia interesting is that she seems to feel Truman's pain, which contrasts with other performers who are more distant from the truth of his suffering. She isn't just playing a role, she's invested in Truman's well-being to some degree. But the fact that she doesn't initially step in to help him, either by breaking character or by telling him the truth, is telling. She's stuck in the machinery of Kristoff's vision, likely unable to see any way out until it reaches a tipping point. If we compare her to other characters like Meryl or Marlin, Sylvia's response seems more driven by genuine empathy for Truman, but empathy doesn't always translate to action in a system as controlling as Kristoff's. She's a fascinating case study in how even those who initially see the wrong in the system can become part of it, at least for a time, because of their dependence on the roles that they've been cast in. Her eventual joining of the resistance could represent the awakening of her moral compass, recognizing that no one can be happy in a world built on such manipulation. She's part of the system, but eventually realizes its wrongness, leading her to fight for Truman's freedom. It's tragic though, because by the time she's part of the resistance, Truman's been trapped for so long that escaping the show isn't as simple as just telling the truth. The resistance is a last-ditch effort to undo the harm done to Truman, but the damage is already so deep, especially when Kristoff still exerts such powerful control. If we view her initial desire to tell Truman the truth as stemming from a personal connection, possibly even an attraction to him, then her arc becomes even more complex. She's not just another cog in the machine of the Truman Show. She's someone who's emotionally invested in Truman's well-being, which might make her situation even more tragic. The idea that Sylvia was originally drawn to Truman in a romantic or emotional sense gives her motivation a deeper layer. Truman, after all, represents a person with real emotions and desires, and for someone like Sylvia, who's likely spent a long time being controlled and manipulated on set, Truman could have felt like a breath of fresh air, something real and genuine amidst the artificiality. If she'd been acting around him for so long and has developed feelings for him, it could make sense that she'd want to break free of the constraints of the show and tell him the truth. Her attachment could create a sense of urgency. She doesn't just feel guilt or sympathy for Truman, but also a personal longing, wanting to be with him and remove him from the suffocating constraints of the world that Kristoff has built. That would be a much more personal betrayal to her than simply being another performer. She'd want Truman to be free, both for himself as a person, but for her own emotional fulfillment as well. This dynamic would also explain her growing frustration with the producers and Kristoff. If Sylvia initially saw Truman as someone she could connect with, her realization that he's being manipulated for the benefit of the show would spark her internal conflict. The producers pulling Truman away from her, whether by keeping him emotionally distant or setting up storylines that limit their interactions, could be seen as both a professional and personal betrayal. Her desire to protect Truman from the show's manipulations could have evolved out of a mixture of guilt, love, and perhaps even jealousy. As for the producers and the show's manipulative nature, Sylvia's eventual joining of the resistance becomes even more poignant. Her romantic attachment to Truman could make it all the more painful to see him forced into these false relationships, to see the producers control his every move. She might have started out seeing him as a project, but as she developed feelings for him, her role became one of moral conflict. Her realization that Truman could never truly reciprocate those feelings given the artificiality of his world might propel her to take the risk of going against the system. Her eventual rebellion, after presumably being stuck in the system and trying to suppress her emotions for so long, could be her form of self-liberation as much as it is about Truman's freedom. She's no longer just following orders. She's actively seeking to give Truman his agency back. Her attachment could give her the motivation that she needs to turn against the very system that created her role in the first place. So if we think about Sylvia's role in the context of romantic attachment, it transforms her into tragic and somewhat sympathetic character. She starts out as someone emotionally connected to Truman, and that connection deepens as she sees how much he's trapped in the world, especially when the show tries to take Truman further away from her. In the end, she's not just taking a moral stand against manipulation, but also a personal one. She's fighting for Truman's freedom, but also for a chance to have a real connection with him. Her commitment to helping Truman is what matters most. Her motivations, whether romantic, moral, or a mixture of both, aren't the defining factors in her role in the story. It's her choice to take action and her willingness to remain committed to the truth that truly defines her. Even though her attachment to Truman might complicate her character, it also humanizes her in a way that's essential to understanding the broader themes of the film. In a sense, Sylvia's represents a key component of the moral conflict within the Truman Show. She's not just a passive character who follows the rules, she actively challenges them. Despite the reasons behind her initial desire to tell Truman the truth, she remains steadfast, risking everything to make sure that Truman gets the opportunity to find out what's real. That alone speaks volumes about her integrity and her recognition of the importance of freedom, truth, and authenticity. In a way, her art could be one that shows the power of personal agency. Even if she's emotionally tied to Truman and feels personal stakes in the situation, she still chooses to act in a way that aligns with what's right, regardless of her feelings. This echoes the film's larger themes of free will and the struggle between personal desire and societal control. Sylvia, like Truman, has her own moments of rebellion, though hers is a quiet resistance and individual act of defiance that contrasts with Truman's ultimate escape. It's fascinating that Sylvia's personal journey from being part of the production to eventually helping Truman can mirror the film's exploration of the tension between personal desires and greater moral imperatives. Whether she initially felt attraction to Truman or was motivated by another factor, her evolution from passive participant to active resistor adds depth to the story and shows that the fight for freedom is often more complicated than it may seem. Sylvia definitely starts as an active participant, but evolves into an emotional catalyst for Truman, someone who unintentionally sparks the shift in his perception of his reality. She's the first person to openly break the facade, even in subtle ways, planting a seed of doubt in Truman's mind. In a way, she embodies the transition between passivity and active resistance. She doesn't just help Truman escape the illusion of his life. She helps him see the possibility of a life beyond the constraints of his constructed world. Now, when we talk about Truman stepping into uncertainty and stepping into the real world, there is a lot to talk about from a philosophical standpoint. His decision to leave the show and step beyond the boundaries of his known world into the unknown is incredibly existential. He's leaving behind everything he's ever known, including the illusion of safety and predictability, for a life that's uncharted and filled with risk. The choice is essentially a leap into what we might call authenticity. He is choosing to live his life on his own terms, regardless of the consequences or the discomfort of venturing into the unknown. From an existential perspective, Truman's act of leaving the show is a reflection of the philosophy of existentialism, especially the works of philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. For Sartre, the core of human existence is our freedom to choose, even when that freedom is daunting or filled with anxiety. Truman's choice to leave is an expression of Sartre's notion of existence before essence. He's not defined by the life that's been constructed for him. He defines himself by choosing to break free from this life. In doing so, Truman affirms his own autonomy. Even if the outside world might seem chaotic or uncertain, the very act of choosing freedom and individuality gives his life meaning. This idea of freedom in the face of uncertainty speaks to a larger tradition that questions the value of the familiar versus the unfamiliar. Truman's world, as suffocating as it was predictable, controlled, and familiar. But it was also limiting, and to step into the unknown represents a kind of authentic freedom, the freedom to define yourself without the constraints of a preordained script. It's not just about physical freedom, but psychological and emotional freedom as well. Truman is finally taking ownership of his own life. In this way, Truman's journey mirrors what Camus refers to as the myth of Sisyphus. Camus argues that we, like Sisyphus, are constantly confronted with the absurdity of life, the tension between our search for meaning and the indifferent universe. Truman's absurd situation is that he's been living in a world that's been artificially created for him, and yet he never questions it. When he steps into the unknown, it's like he's embracing the absurd, acknowledging that the life itself is uncertain and controllable and choosing to live in it anyway. The power of the Truman Show is that Truman, like Sisyphus, becomes aware of his absurd predicament, and in doing so, he finds a kind of liberation. This leap into uncertainty, especially after the safety and predictability of his constructed world, raises questions about the nature of freedom itself. Is freedom simply the absence of constraint, or is there something deeper? An active engagement with the unknown, the ability to shape one's own destiny even when the outcome is unclear? Truman doesn't just leave to escape his constraints, he leaves to take ownership of his life, even if it means he's walking into a world that's filled with risks and dangers. On the other hand, freedom in the Truman Show can also be read as a philosophical statement on the limits of control. Truman's life was an attempt to control everything, to script a perfect reality that adhered to certain ideals like love, success, and happiness. But true freedom is about embracing the imperfections and the messiness of real life. His exit from the show marks a rejection of a world that tried to perfect and predetermine everything for him. The world that Truman steps into, though uncertain, is a real world, and that reality in its messy and unpredictable nature offers Truman the freedom to shape his own future. It's only by embracing this uncertainty that he truly becomes free. Philosophically, it's a bold statement that freedom is not something easily obtained by external means, but something that comes from within, a willingness to face the unknown, a rejection of manufactured control, and an acceptance of the uncertainties of life. Truman's decision to leave the Truman Show is definitely, I would say, a blend of instinct and courage. The gut reaction, the visceral need to escape when he realizes the truth is entirely human. The idea of being trapped for so long in a place where everything is monitored would be enough to make anyone want to run. But what's truly remarkable about Truman's choice is that he chooses to face the uncertainty on the other side of the wall, despite knowing that it could be dangerous, uncomfortable, or even traumatic. That act alone is a testament to his courage. He has no idea what the real world holds, but he knows that it's his only shot at authenticity and at owning his own life. Truman has no way of fully comprehending what fame and public attention will do to him once he's out in the real world. He's likely going to be treated as a spectacle just like he was in the show, but in a much less controlled environment. People will still see him as a symbol of something. His life will still be shaped by others' perceptions of him, but now it will be uncontrollable. This new freedom will come with a price. Truman will have to contend with the people who are now invested in his story, the people who see him as an object rather than a person. The fact that he steps into that reality knowing this and still choosing freedom reflects how much he's grown and how much he yearns to find a life where he can have agency even if it's uncertain. It's also interesting to think about the idea of discernment. This is where Truman's journey gets more complex because while he's seeking freedom, he also doesn't yet have the tools to navigate this world he's stepping into. In the constructed world, his entire life was curated and his desires were manipulated for entertainment. When he steps out, it's not just about freedom. It's about learning how to differentiate between what's real and what's another form of manipulation or control. He's never had to practice discernment in his life because everything was spoon-fed to him. The real world, where people have their own motivations and agendas, will force Truman to confront these challenges. It's almost like his decision to leave is only the first step of a much larger journey, a journey that goes beyond physical freedom and into the deeper work of psychological and emotional freedom. It's about learning how to trust himself, how to make decisions for himself, and how to interact with people who don't have the same scripted relationship with him as the people in the show did. The idea of discernment touches on a larger issue. What does true freedom look like when you have the capacity to make choices, but those choices come with consequences? Truman's freedom is not just escaping the walls of the set, it's learning how to live with the weight of his choices in this unpredictable world. His lack of discernment is actually part of what makes his departure from the dome so bittersweet. While he leaves the constraints of the show behind, he steps into a world where freedom is not as straightforward. There will be people who want to control him and use him, and he has to figure out how to protect himself while navigating these relationships. His freedom is as much about emotional maturity as it is about physical liberation. That's one of the key takeaways from Truman's journey. Freedom isn't just the absence of control. It's about knowing how to navigate the world on your own terms while recognizing the forces that still influence you. It's about understanding the complexities of choice and learning to trust your own judgment even when the outcome is unknown. So there are a few different moments in the film that I want to talk about and their symbolism and kind of what they stand for. So we're going to run through those really quickly because baby, this video is already an hour and 10 minutes long, okay? So the first one I want to talk about is the wall as a boundary. The literal wall that Truman encounters as he tries to leave the set is the most obvious and concrete symbol of his imprisonment, but the wall also symbolizes the emotional, psychological, and social barriers Truman has been trapped within his entire life. It represents the constructed limits placed on him by the Truman Show's creators. These walls are not just physical, they represent the constraints of his knowledge, his worldview, and his sense of self. They've defined who he is, where he can go, what he can do, and for most of his life, he didn't even know those walls existed. When Truman finally faces the wall, it's not just the end of the physical set. It marks the end of a life defined by other people's desires and manipulation. His refusal to turn back, his decision to keep pushing forward and literally break through the wall, is symbolic of his will to break free from the limitations others have imposed on him. In a way, like confronting one's own limits and choosing to surpass them, even when there's fear of what lies beyond. The next is the boat and the storm. The storm that Truman faces when he tries to sail beyond the boundaries is another powerful symbol. The producers of the show manipulate the weather to keep him trapped, trying to force him back, but Truman's defiance of the storm is an act of self-liberation. The storm can symbolize not just the physical obstacles, but the emotional and mental turmoil that Truman faces as he tries to break free. The turbulent waters are metaphorical for the emotional chaos Truman feels as he confronts the truth and tries to step into the unknown. It's as if the world itself is fighting him, but Truman's determination to survive and keep moving forward shows his strength and resilience. He's not just fighting a literal storm, he's fighting against his own confusion, his sense of betrayal, and the existential crisis that he's facing. His sailing into the storm shows that freedom often requires enduring hardship. It's not a peaceful, easy escape. Freedom comes with struggle and resistance, but Truman's willingness to sail through the storm shows his courage in the face of that hardship. He's seeking the unknown, even if it means enduring the emotional storms that come with it. It's symbolic of the human experience. Finding freedom is often messy, difficult, and painful. The next is the door and the exit. When Truman reaches the door to the real world, the exit from the show, it can be seen as a symbol of finality and self-actualization. It's not just the physical door that he's walking through, it represents the transition from ignorance to enlightenment. For Truman, this moment is the culmination of his entire journey, the moment when he fully realizes the truth and can make a choice about who he is and how he wants to live. Walking through the door is his conscious decision to reject the false world he's lived in and to step into an uncertain, complex reality. This moment is also significant because of how it mirrors so many stories of self-discovery or coming of age. Truman is essentially walking through a portal into a new phase of life, leaving behind the constructed illusion for something more real, albeit uncertain and unknown. It's like when someone reaches a point in life where they finally take responsibility for their own choices and realize that they can create their own path. The door is a threshold to a new beginning, but it's also a point of no return. Once Truman steps through, there's no going back to the comforting, though fake, certainty of his previous life. The next is the audience watching Truman. Throughout the film, Truman's life is being broadcast to an audience. As he breaks through the wall and walks into the real world, the audience of the show, and by extension, the audience of the film, become a symbol of society's obsession with voyeurism. We've talked a lot about this before, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. But his final exit is a rejection of the watching eyes that have been consuming his life. His escape symbolizes the rejection of society's need to watch and control people for entertainment or validation. It's an act of reclaiming privacy, of rejecting the role of the object being watched and taking control over his own narrative. The moment when Truman exits the show also represents his rejection of being defined by other people's perceptions of him. He steps away from the role that was crafted for him, the version of himself that was a product of manipulation and scripting. This mirrors the experience of anyone who's trying to carve out an authentic identity in a world that constantly demands conformity, representation, and validation. When Truman leaves the set and steps into the real world, the audience watching him for the last time, both within the world of the show and outside of it, is in awe of his decision. In a sense, his escape exposes the futility of the show. Despite all of Kristoff's control, Truman still manages to break free. This can symbolize how no matter how tightly society tries to control individuals through expectations, narratives, or media, there is still something deeply human, something powerful, that pushes people to break free and seek authenticity. The fact that Truman's journey ends in a moment of defiance, walking away from the cameras, from the audience, and from the artificial world, speaks to how our need for freedom is fundamental. Truman's escape is a victory not just for him, but for the human spirit, showing that even under the most extreme manipulation, the desire for self-determination and authenticity will ultimately prevail. At the end of the film, when Truman says, "In case I don't see you later, good afternoon, good evening, and good night," it's a symbolic closure to the show and his life in it. It's a line he said over and over, a product of the show's scripting, but now Truman's use of it takes on a new meaning. It's as if he's taking back control of the words and making them his own, reclaiming them as an act of agency. It's the final step in Truman becoming his true self and stepping into a world where he's no longer just a character to be watched, but a person in control of his own story. Truman's escape then is not just a physical act. It's a profound symbolic gesture of breaking free from the shackles of a manufactured life. It's the ultimate metaphor for self-liberation, individuality, and the complex journey toward living an authentic life, despite the obstacles, the systems, and the expectations that try to define us. It's about reclaiming one's own narrative and choosing to live on one's own terms. And while the future Truman steps into is uncertain, it is his own to navigate, and that uncertainty is in itself a form of freedom. The legacy of The Truman Show is remarkable, and its continued relevance almost 30 years after its release can be attributed to its exploration of themes that are still incredibly pertinent today. We've talked about the critique of media manipulation, identity, voyeurism, and the search for authenticity, and these themes have only become more pronounced as technology and media have continued to evolve. The Truman Show has also left a lasting impact on pop culture. Its influence can be seen in how modern media addresses themes of surveillance, reality, and the ethics of control. The concept of a Truman-esque life where people's every move is monitored and their authenticity questioned has become a cultural shorthand for discussing issues of privacy and surveillance. The film has inspired everything from reality TV shows to dystopian stories in literature and television that explore themes of control, surveillance, and the nature of reality. The Truman Show remains one of the most insightful and timeless films because it challenges us to consider how much of our lives are shaped by forces beyond our control. Truman's journey is not just a personal one. It's a universal exploration of freedom, authenticity, and the human desire to break free from the confines of artificial systems. From Kristoff's godlike control to Truman's search for truth, the film offers us a mirror to reflect on our own realities, questioning how much of our world is truly real and how much is constructed for our consumption. In the age of 24/7 media access, The Truman Show resonates more than ever, urging us to consider the ways in which we participate in the voyeurism of our own lives, especially when it comes to celebrities and influencers. Truman's escape, his confrontation with the unknown, is symbolic of our own struggles to face uncertainty and choose authenticity over comfort. It serves as a reminder that true freedom comes not from knowing exactly what lies ahead, but from the courage to step outside the walls we've been placed within. As we think about the lasting legacy of The Truman Show, it's clear that it laid the groundwork for films like The Matrix, offering a philosophical explanation of reality perception and the freedom to choose one's own path. Both films challenge us to wake up from the illusions that dominate our lives, whether those illusions are media manipulation, societal expectations, or even the artificial boundaries we place on ourselves. And I am working on a video that talks about the link between those two movies. It will be on my Patreon. The link is in the description down below. I should have that up in about a week or so. So if you enjoyed this analysis and want to dive deeper into these themes or explore other movies that deal with similar issues, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Also, feel free to drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Do you see The Truman Show as a warning or just an empowering story about the human spirit? Or both? Or none? What do you think? And as always, if you want to join in on future discussions about films, media, and culture, be sure to check out the links in the description to my other content. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth might be out there, but it's up to you to seek it. And in case I don't see you,
good afternoon, good evening, and good night.